Entonces, antes de darle la entrada,
And before we continue with Rob Harley from Marquise, I wanted to let you know that we have l- the information for your departures. This is outside, but you can ask me, you can ask Alejandro, you can ask Carlos. So, in other words, we have your itinerary information if you need any information. And if anyone hasn't registered, please let us know so we can include you in our list. And now, we're going to have with us Rob Hurley, who's going to be presenting the perspective about DDGs with Solid Vols. Rob is the global manager for grains for Marquise. Uh, and Rob, it's quite a pleasure to have you here with us today. And Rob, the floor is yours.
As he had mentioned, Alvaro had mentioned, my name is Robert Hurley. I'm the Director of Global Grains at Marquis Energy. We are a producer of ethanol and DDGS and high protein, which we call Pro Gold, and the technology is ProCap. We have two facilities, one in Illinois, that's our headquarters, and the other one is in Wisconsin. Our headquarters, the headquarter plant, is the world's largest dry mill ethanol plant in the world. And we'll get into that a little bit later. What I'm going to discuss today is from a marketing standpoint and a trading standpoint and a producer standpoint, where I see the development of the high protein technology in the ethanol industry and where that trajectory is going. See if I can get this down here. All right, as I mentioned, we have two production facilities. We have it in gallons, the production value in gallons. I'll just convert that for you into tons. Simply put, our Illinois facility, which again is the world's largest dry mill, is about 1 million tons of DDG production, metric tons, and 1 million tons of ethanol, as well as 1 million tons of carbon, which will be relevant later on in this presentation for the other innovation fronts of our industry, in addition to the high protein. We are a family company, and as you can see from our director, our leadership board, Mark Marquis is the CEO. He founded the company with his father back in the 1970s, and it started out from just a few trucks and a small bank loan to where we are today. Jason Marquis is his son. He is the COO, and he is sort of I would call him like the mad scientist of our company. He developed the ProCap technology, amongst other things, and he's been developing that for about 4 or 5 years now. And then Tom Marquis is the cousin of Mark, and sort of a recurring theme in Marquis is that you'll see a lot of the family names. His son works for the company. One of Mark's other son is sort of on the political lobbying front, and Tom's other son is Ben Marquis. He is the IT director. Here's the technical director leadership board. Now, Jennifer was supposed to be doing this presentation, so I just want to preemptively from the beginning tell you I'm not technical. I am the export manager, director, and so I can give you as much perspective as I can on the technical side, and I'll do as best as I can, but I won't pretend to be a technical expert. But hopefully I can bring some color to the trade side and the export side and the logistical flow, if you have any questions on that as well. So I'd mentioned a little bit about where we started for our beginnings or our route at Marquis. Again, it started with just a few trucks back in the 1970s with a small bank loan, and then they just evolved into any opportunity that presented itself in Illinois. They started to innovate. They grew. They started doing fertilizer imports. They would take fertilizer imports through New Orleans from Russia and then take that to the Chicagoland area. Then they started doing merchandising for the local farmers. And then they expanded eventually into ethanol. And as you can see, the latest steps of our innovation were into the ProCap, or the high protein DDG technology, and the sanitizer opportunities that COVID presented us with in 2020, which a lot of ethanol plants did as well. And this is our site back in 2005 before we started construction. And then 3 years later, it was complete. The first unit is half of where we are, what our production is today. And that's what the site looks like today. And again, this is where we have our ProCap technology installed and where our ProGold production is occurring at this moment. This is our Wisconsin facility. Oops, go back. This is our Wisconsin facility. We are installing the technology there as well, and we are going to be putting in a dryer in by the end of this year. In addition to our own sites, we do have licenses out to sell this technology to third-party plants. And we're competing, obviously, with, and I'll get into this a little bit more later in detail, there's about 3 or 4 competing technologies for the high protein in the DDGS field. And so that'll create some opportunities for these companies that are involved and some challenges in terms of being able to communicate standardized quality and specs to the customers in the marketplace. So this is the footprint in total of Marquis. And as you can see, we aren't the size or the scope of a ADM or a Poet, but we are very highly leveraged on the export market. I would say virtually 99% of the Illinois production will go for export via the river system. And I would say Wisconsin is probably about 80%. All right, so I just kind of wanted to hurry through that, give you a background of what we do and where we are and where we came from. And this is going to dive into the ProCap side a little bit. Again, well, I jumped in front of this a little bit. To paint a picture as to our logistics and our logistical advantage, like I mentioned earlier, we are highly leveraged on the river system, meaning that I would say 99% of the exports that we do out of Illinois is on the barge system. So we do load barges at our facility on site. When we do containers, we do load those on site as well because we are about 1 hour and 20 minutes away from Chicago. So we have the opportunity to pick and choose. Right now, I would say that for our ProGold, our high protein feed, I would say that we do about 80% via the bulk or the barge system into bulk vessels. We can do containers as well, and we have, but it's not our typical move. In this slide, you're probably well aware of the U.S. corn system or the Corn Belt. We sit on the eastern side of that, and that provides us with a little bit of an advantage in terms of competitiveness in corn basis. Iowa has nearly 100 ethanol plants, and Illinois has 13 or 15 thereabout. So it provides us with more supply of corn and a more competitive basis for purchasing that corn. And this is the rail system. Again, you're probably well aware of this, but I feel like it's still productive to go over it. You basically have 2 different rail systems in the United States. We sit on the rail system that is eastward facing. So if we were to utilize this system, the rail system for our plant, which we do on ethanol, but we do not on distillers, it would be going to the east. And the flip side of that is you have the UN and the BP, or the BN and the UP that go to the West Coast. And this lays out sort of where we sit. You can see on that top picture, this is an outdated picture. We have upgraded infrastructure on that. It's actually a very impressive river port now. It's about 1 mile long of river frontage. And then 2 parallel barge loading elevators. And so we load our dry and our liquid barges off of that dock. And you can't necessarily see it, but past that white building and up that hill is our ethanol plant. So it's all on our own land. There's no need to do a third-party move, and nobody else touches our product before it gets onto the river or on the vessel for that matter. And for our ethanol guys, they have tanks down in down in New Orleans, IMTT St. Rose. And as you can see, for the feed side, we use either weigh rigs or midstreamers. This happens to be the MGMT down in New Orleans, where it's a weigh rig operation. We actually do most of our loading at midstreamers. And this gives you an idea of our development. We're a newcomer in the export market. We really did not start exporting until about 2018. And we were selling all of our product domestically to the ABCDs, and that was fine. But the next evolution, we felt, the natural evolution, was for us to start getting involved in the downstream, especially since we're exporting nearly 1 million tons indirectly via traders at that time. So we decided to take the next step and start getting involved directly ourselves. And you can see here we went from 9%, that was our first year in 2018. That was our first year we got involved in exports. And then 2021, we were 24% and fighting for the top spot for bulk exports. 2022, I expect to be very similar. This is our ethanol footprint. We are certainly not shipping DDGs to Brazil. So our ethanol footprint is pretty global as well. And you can see our DDG footprint is similarly global. For us, our best markets have traditionally been Southeast Asia and the Mediterranean. And this gives you a full view of where our total global presence is. And you can see sort of, we've got offices in Singapore, our global office in Singapore. We've got an office in Spain, and we've got three different locations in the United States. We will likely be opening another European office here within the next 6 months. And I think we're going to be opening an office in Brazil. All right, so, and this is where I work. On to ProGold. ProGold is from our ProCap technology, as I had mentioned earlier. And it's presented us with an opportunity to get into a higher value downstream market, which everybody's well aware of. You have, like I said, 3 or 4 different technologies that are competing. They're all relatively new, and it has brought in a fragmented market for the ethanol industry, which, as I said, is an opportunity, but also a challenge. And a lot of the way that we are going to surmount that challenge is by being better in our messaging to the market and to consumers. Distillers grains, as you know, has been relatively well received. It's a very established product, unlike the high protein technologies that are hitting the market. And let's see here, I think I got out of, I'm gonna jump ahead here and then go back. Yeah. So in the marketplace, you have our technology will produce a 50 protein, and I'm talking as is. I know a lot of you talk as dry matter, but a 50 protein and a 11 to 12% fat. So we are a higher fat protein, high pro corn fermented protein product. And then that range will go all the way down to a 40 protein and a 5 or 6% fat. And then you've got some technologies that will wind up in the middle that will be a 50% protein and a 2 to 3% fat. And that's sort of the problem. Like I said, we'll call it a challenge, which is all these technologies are producing different products, which makes it difficult for the market to accept these varying products. And now, to talk about ours, here we go. I had my slides out of order. So I'll speak on our technology. since it produces something that's sort of anomalous from the others, which is the higher fat content, and sort of how we do it. And like I said, I do not come from the technical background, but I'll do my best to answer any questions on this. Simply put, what we do is throughout the ethanol process, after you separate the alcohol, you have the thin stillage that traditionally, you have whole stillage, and then you have the thin stillage that will be separated and spun out for corn oil, right? And then you have your regular DDGs. What we have done, or what our COO has done, has developed his own in-house technology that will take that thin stillage, introduce a polymer, and then put it through a DAF system, which will allow for, you will then aerate that high protein thin stillage, and then it will aerate through the DAF system, and it pushes up the particles, the small and large particles will bubble up together. As you can see, when it starts to, there you go. You can see it starts to float up, and we just scrape it off. Now, that in turn will make a high protein wet cake, and we simply just put the high protein wet cake back into the drying system, which leaves us with the 50 protein, 12% fat, high protein product. And this is what that process looks like. So you can see that thin stillage as it gets a little bit thicker, and then you spin out the oil, and then you're left with the cooked high protein cake. And what we found actually is that the high protein is denser, quite a bit denser. So we do enjoy a higher stow factor in our logistics, which might not be relevant to you, but it may in terms of it translates into a lower logistical freight rate for our consumers. And you can see what I'm talking about we're all very familiar with the ethanol process, but in the liquids, I'm not sure if I have a pointer. Oops. I do? Oh, nice. All right, yeah, so right here is where I'm talking about we introduce a polymer once we spin out those liquids, then we put it through a DAF system, which you saw earlier, where the polymer is introduced, it will spin out, or it will aggregate the small and larger particles together. It floats up through that DAF system, and then we scrape it off, and then we cook it. Okay, another breakdown of the ethanol plants and locations.
A bioethanol facility.
Yeah, there we go.
A bioethanol facility uses the natural processes of photosynthesis and fermentation to create three primary co-products in equal volumes: ethanol, animal feed, and CO2. Ethanol has played an important role in decarbonizing transportation fuels for over 25 years, yet its usage as a liquid fuel is almost mundane compared to its market potential as a platform molecule. Ethanol can be used to make the largest produced petroleum-based chemical, ethylene, which can be processed into bioplastics, sustainable aviation fuels, chemicals, and renewable diesel. When it comes to low-carbon feed solutions, bioethanol also plays a vital role. Fermentation converts starch and sugars to ethanol, but the remaining fat and protein are concentrated into an animal feed product known as dried distillers grains, or DDG. Additionally, Marquis Energy has developed a proprietary process to produce a high-protein feed known as ProCap Gold, which is an even further concentrated source of protein for animals and aquaculture. While the world enjoys an excess of carbohydrates in feed, fat and protein are in much shorter supply. DDG and ProCap Gold offer a low-carbon alternative that provides concentrated fat and protein feed to global markets. At Marquis, 1.2 million tons of pure, biogenic carbon dioxide is captured during fermentation each year. And with a location directly above the Mount Simon Sandstone Geological Storage Site, the captured CO2 can be permanently sequestered deep underground.
All right. So that kind of segues us nicely to the next portion of the presentation. At Marquis, in that short video just now, he described that we are going to be capturing carbon as well. which is relevant for the other front of innovation for our industry on capturing carbon and lowering our CO2, our carbon footprint, which in turn will translate into a lower carbon footprint feed, which we view will be the next forefront of innovation for our industry. And he'd also mentioned that we sit on a geological formation, a shale formation, which is suitable for carbon sequestration and storage. And we've already drilled a well that's about 5,000 feet deep, and we're waiting for permits to officially start the sequestration and capture of our carbon at Marquis. And we also want to address the way that the industry is measuring carbon footprints. Traditionally, it has been a carbon credit system, which doesn't necessarily track the carbon emissions from the start of the process, from the very beginning of the process of planting the crop and the implements that were involved on that front, and as well as the production, the entire production chain to the logistical emissions involved with delivering it to your customer. And we use a credit or a calculation that's called ISCC plus. There's a few of them, but on the very bottom, the ISCC and ISCC plus, that's the system or the calculation that the Europeans use. And it has allowed us to have access to the European market, which has been very beneficial for us as a company in terms of profit for the last couple of years. And again, as I mentioned, it's more of a life cycle assessment, starting from the very beginning of the production process, including the planting, through the entirety of the process to get it to your customer. Some more on that. And then finally here, this was a public release that we had announced, I think, a couple months ago, that we will be kicking off our carbon capture. We think this will dovetail nicely with where the feed industry is going in terms of catching up with, I would say, the energy industry and trying to have low carbon or low carbon intensity feed for the future. Thank you.
In this system of DDGS production at the level of protein, crude, high protein crude. So what is the insoluble protein that you guarantee? Because that's the point in order to be digestible, the protein. And the other point is that at the level of sulfur that you use from fermentation, because that's a problem in ruminants that translates from cephalomalacy.
I'll preface this with, I'd like to point everybody to a website for sort of a full nutritional breakdown for Marquis. So it's, again, forgive me, I meant to put this on our presentation. It's Marquis, M-A-R-Q-U-I-S, ProCap, PROCAP.com. And there's a full, we have studies, we have full studies that we've done at a couple of different universities, and it has a full nutritional analysis breakdown. Speaking to the soluble protein, the studies that I think we have results for, we have it's a 78% to 82%.
¿Alguien más?
Sí, aquí. Quisiera preguntar.
Yeah, I would like to ask you the following. I would like to ask you the following question. Expectations for this year with regards to the ethanol market. And I would also like to ask you about consumptions, corn consumptions in the United States, specifically for ethanol. If you can talk about that, please.
And for the expectations side, are we talking about the expectations for the value of the high protein feed?
No, excuses. Con respecto,
Actually, the question is thinking about, well, my question is your oil projections, oil price projections, and based on that, do you expect to increase your ethanol production and obviously DDGSs that go hand in hand, or what are your expectations with regards to ethanol production this year?
You think he's talking about corn oil, right?
more like a market outlook.
Okay. And we're talking corn oil or oil in general?
No, ethanol.
Ethanol
and
and-
DDGs and how that translates
Okay.
to DDGs.
It's very interesting that the development, so when you look at the projections for the United States and what the future market outlook is, we really have to start looking at South America, specifically Brazil, because Brazil is it's very quickly becoming a competitor on the ethanol side. They're going to plant more corn, they're going to continue to plant more corn, and potentially develop more ethanol production. Now, for the US, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't think, number one, I do not think that policy will be negative for ethanol production. I think the EPA will continue to support renewable industry and within the renewable industry, the ethanol market and ethanol producers. And I do not think, contrary to common opinion, I do not believe that Brazil planting more corn and producing more ethanol and DDGs is a net negative for the United States. That most people agree that the US will likely export 10 million tons less than they do now in the very near future. That will translate to a lower corn basis in the United States, thereby lowering the cost of corn procurement for the United States ethanol producers. Now, if you want to get into the very far future and talking about electric vehicles and all that, I would say that my opinion is that EVs always seem to be this unicorn on the horizon that never quite gets there. So I'm not really concerned about being displaced from the fuel supply in terms of conventional internal combustion engines and electrical vehicles. For DDGs, I have an opinion that you probably wouldn't hear from a guy in my position. I think when you look at the macro overall protein, might be getting feedback from you. The macro protein market will likely come under pressure. So I think DDGs, the per protein price will come down mainly because the United States is about to install a very large amount of soy crush. So the US will be a soy meal, net exporter of soybean meal, much more than we are exporting today, which is going to put pressure on all proteins. And that means that US soybean meal price per ton will be pushed down as well. And that, with it, will take down the DDG price as it does trade predominantly as a protein. But again, like I said, that the blow on that will be softened because we're going to have a lower corn basis. And having said that, we are at Marcos, we are going to be installing a soybean crush facility in the next 2 years that will be producing 2 million tons a year. So we wouldn't be looking, my overall outlook is still bullish, positive, because we would not be investing as an ethanol plant in a soy crush facility right next to our ethanol facility where we also plan to expand. We're very bullish protein in general because we view the world as very carbohydrate rich, maybe oversupplied, and then a protein deficit. It's a long-winded answer, sorry. Yes.
So my experience with
Sí, mi experiencia con DDGs de alta proteína fermentados. Entiendo que estos usualmente utilizan enzimas para que el producto se pueda llevar a cabo y luego se eliminan del producto final. Nos dijiste que utilizan un polímero. ¿Cómo aseguran de que ese polímero no termine en el producto final o no está en el producto final? Bueno, no estoy seguro si puedo responderte. Jennifer, posiblemente sí, pero sí, como dijiste, las enzimas se matan o se desaparecen antes de llegar al producto final. Así que sí, lo debemos de hacer antes de llevarlo al mercado. Y de hecho, para nosotros también fue una gran preocupación, especialmente para los productos de dietas de mascotas. Y si este existiese en el producto final, no lo podríamos utilizar para alimentos para mascotas. Desafortunadamente, no te puedo responder de mejor manera.
¿Alguna otra?
Do we have any other questions?
Bueno, Rob, muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Thank you.
No, definitivamente muy interesante y una presentación muy buena para hacer la transición.
Again, quite interesting presentation and a very good point for our transition to the next presentation. So we're about to break for lunch. Again, lunch is going to take place in the lobby L2, right next to where we register to access the hotel. I understand we're going to have sort of like a buffet in L2, and the idea is to begin the afternoon's conferences at 1:30 again. So we would like to ask you to be back before 1:30, say 1:20. That way we're going to be able to continue on time, and that way we're going to be able to begin the last two panels that we have planned so we can conclude our regional